Hey, I'm Rob McIntosh. Welcome to a new CHIP panel. We have three great companies and founders here with us. A little bit about this panel is that we're calling it the rise of disability and startup innovation. We have Steve, Erica, and Raj. They both work in the disability innovation space. Why don't I kick it off to you, Steve, and you kind of introduce yourself, and then Erica, then Raj.
Yeah, happy to do it. Hi, I'm Steve Arose. I'm co-founder and CEO of Verboso. Verboso is a full stack speech therapy solution that provides face-to-face teletherapy for children that need speech therapy, as well as automated video games that kids can play and in the comfort of their own home in order to promote home practice. And they also report real-time performance and compliance data back to the therapist.
Awesome. Erica.
Hi, my name is Erica. I'm founder of a company called No Limits. We make adaptive clothing for people who struggle to dress themselves due to a disability. We really emphasize comfort, confidence, and independence. We design for the end user, not a caretaker. And that's what we're working on. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. My name is Rajiv Ramnath. I'm the founder of Blueberry Technology. We're a San Jose area-based company. We design and manufacture autonomous wheelchairs for indoor use. And we're starting off with our beachhead being places like airports where wheelchair services are used frequently.
Great, very interesting. I know there's been a lot of discussion of this sort of current trends in disability technology, a lot of different innovation coming in play, and a lot of different investment from that angle. What do you guys see as some of the new trends, new ideas, and maybe the shifting landscape from that perspective?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. I think one of the big shifts, and Erica, what your company is doing is sort of incorporating the end user into designing the product. I think for a long time, solutions have been made with either the caretaker in mind or the product builder and their vision. I think, right now there's a big shift. Our company was a 2019 awardee of the Microsoft AI for Accessibility Grant. And one of their big things was, how are you building feedback, and are you using people from the disability space and with the specific disability that you're trying to address into the development of your product? So I think from a product standpoint, that's been a big shift in focus, and something that not only the market's looking to see, but also investors and other stakeholders as well.
Great. What are you seeing in your industry, Raj? I know we had a brief discussion before this panel, and you had a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think in the larger scheme of things, what's exciting to me about this space is how there is a gigantic talent pool building up in the robotic space. Because with the advent of something called ROS, Robot Operating System, there is a true democratization of software development over here. Now, the hardware development still stays somewhat constrained, but all of a sudden, there's a large generation of engineers who are excited to do more than just work in industry for an industrial application. They're looking beyond this and trying to make a social difference. So that's exciting to me. We put out a job posting a few days ago, and I have been completely overwhelmed with responses. As I read those responses, you see at least what I consider fresh out of college kids. And they have gobs of experience in trying to build something that has a social angle to it. So that's exciting from a talent standpoint. And this is generally reflected even on the investor standpoint as well. So far, we've raised primarily from angels. But in my conversation with these angels, every single one of them says, it's about time. It's about time we tried to bring technologies that are commonplace to you and me as able-bodied people, cell phones that are commonplace to you and me, with a minor twist to it. And now all of a sudden you're addressing a much larger population. So it's exciting from that standpoint as well, where investors are, at least angel investors, are looking beyond just your high growth SaaS solution. So that's positive on that side. Now there's another aspect on the investor side and the government side where there's increased activity in terms of legislating differences here. So all in all, I think it's all good. It's all working towards the right solution.
Erica, what are you seeing in your kind of space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Steve touched on it too, is this shift from prioritizing a caretaker to prioritizing the end user. And something else that I think I could add is just this kind of virtual world that we're living in now has really evened the playing field for a lot of people with disabilities. And so I think we're realizing that welcoming more people into the workforce, Raj mentioned talent, people who are, experiencing these problems, welcoming them into this virtual workforce is an incredible opportunity right now. And also with the rise of platforms like TikTok, for example, people with disabilities having a voice in social media, raising awareness, we're seeing a shift from kind of allies speaking out and saying, hey, accessibility needs to be a thing. Now we're seeing this incredible shift of people with disabilities themselves having a voice and a platform and advocating for themselves, which is incredible to see. And so something that we've been seeing in kind of this clothing apparel space is larger brands starting to recognize that this segment is large enough that it deserves, not only is it the right thing to do to cater to these audiences, but there's a financial incentive for them now too. They're recognizing that these audiences are larger than they realized at the beginning. So, not only that strategic value of welcoming customers that they haven't necessarily been able to welcome before, but there's a true financial incentive there too, which is a great case to be able to make to investors. So those are kind of the shifts that I've seen even in the past few months, which has been incredible.
Yeah, do you feel that I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, and Raj, you mentioned, I think in a conversation that we had, that maybe things are, shifting from this philanthropic mentality to actually understanding that this space is growing and there's a huge need there for innovation.
Absolutely, Rob. I think the first thing we have to recognize is, at least in the space that we are trying to address with Blueberry, we are going after wheelchair services in airports. And if you look at our customer, our majority of our customers are folks with hidden disabilities. And this is a space that most of us have completely ignored, right? We expect somebody who's disabled to show a physical form of that disability. It doesn't have to be. There are folks with disabilities that are hidden, that are not obvious to you and me, but unless you actually empathize with them, unless you talk to them, you will not realize that there is something they need help with. So a lot of our customer base, if you may, our consumer base, are folks with hidden disabilities. And this segment of the population is gigantic. And even within the hidden disability space, if you look at the elderly population, we were looking at, back in the 90s, we were looking at something in the order of 6% of the global population being elderly, 65 and above. And it's projected in 2050, it's projected to be somewhere around 16% of our population. So there's a gigantic population base of paying customers who want to fly on our airplanes, who need help. All we have to do is recognize that this is a large enough segment And like Erica mentioned, these are well-intentioned, well-paying customers who can monetize a business as well. All we have to do is recognize them. And so long as we can identify investors, be it philanthropic groups, be it government agencies, be it angels, be it venture capitalists, I think we very quickly realize that the total addressable market here is gigantic. And what we do for the disability segment, if we can call it this, is going to help everyone. It's not going to help just the folks with disabilities. There's a much larger market here to address.
Steve, do you feel a similar way about Raj's sentiments?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Rob, as you touched on at the start, for a long time this was maybe looked at in a philanthropic way, and grant funding might have been your best way to get up and start it off the ground, or even really continue to fund operations. But now, we're realizing that folks who have disabilities or need a little bit of additional care are paying customers, and they have economic power, and they're looking for solutions to help, just like everyone else, make their lives easier, and that's not to be discounted. So I think you're seeing the rise of impact investing and folks that are really starting to take this seriously. And Raj, as you said, I really liked what you said, that this can help not only the individual that has the need, but also the folks around them. When you help the individual with the need, you help the people that are trying to help them and take care of them. Just from an anecdotal use case from our technology, parents that are trying to help their kids with speech therapy, often when the kids go home, it's on the parent to sort of guide them through the speech therapy, right? But they're not trained speech pathologists, so they struggle to really have that knowledge to guide them through. Well, what we're trying to build is a solution that sort of takes that pressure off of the parent, right? So while you're designing for the individual with the need, you're also then alleviating some of the pressure of the caretakers as well, even though, as we talked about earlier, Erica, you're designing for the end user, but you are alleviating some of that pressure as well. It's I think it's really changing, and I think investors and the business community is starting to take notice.
What have you guys seen as some of the overall challenges? I know this is a growing industry, but I presume that you're running into some of maybe those philanthropic challenges. Not to say that's not a good place to receive this type of funding, but has there been any pushback or challenges from that perspective when either pitching your idea or developing that market adoption?
That's a tricky one, Rob. Because most of the philanthropic groups that I have spoken with, most of the impact funds that I've spoken with, they understand this problem. They understand the challenge here. So I think the ability to get that thought process across to philanthropic groups is not as challenging, because most philanthropic groups, at least the ones I've spoken with, come with a level of empathizing with the problem that we are solving than, say, a venture capitalist who is essentially looking to grow the resources that they have collected into something larger to give somebody else a return. So the philanthropic groups, I think, incentivize a little differently in terms of trying to make a difference. The pushback, if any, that I have seen in philanthropic groups is, yes, we are helping with our wheelchairs, we're helping passengers in airports, or we're potentially helping passengers in airports, but gosh, this is expensive. This is a lot of money we're talking about, because we are building hardware and software. And as anybody would know, at least the panel here would know, building hardware is not cheap. So it comes with a very large bill. And I think that is, if any, there's some pushback over there. So the size of the grants accessible through philanthropic organizations is generally a little smaller than what you would get from, say, a venture capitalist. But that's, if any, the only pushback I've seen, Rob.
I know, Erica, you kind of touched on that, sort of people realizing the potential of this market in terms of a size. Is there any other challenges that you faced when pitching your idea or talking about your company as
Yeah, I think Raj really did a good job of the philanthropic groups are definitely like have their finger on the pulse here. And I'm starting to see the shift in more traditional family offices, angels. But there definitely have been times where I've gone in and they're like, this weren't like, no way. Like I don't even know someone with a disability. And I'm like, oh, might want to like reevaluate that. But so that's, always going to be a little bit of a fight with some people. And it's just, I guess, not worth the fight. Find the people that resonate with your mission. But the other thing that's a challenge on our side is just everybody's needs in this space are different. And so a challenge is like, how do you really provide the best solutions for your customers when everybody's experience with disability is a little bit different. And so that's a challenge that we're addressing and trying to make it work for the most people. I do want to like pull on a thread that Raj mentioned earlier, and that is that like these adaptive solutions, when done very well, benefit more than just the end user. The prime example is like text messaging, right? So that was created for people who were deaf, so they could message each other. And like I don't even know how many text messages I've sent now. So I want to like really highlight that because there's something really important there in the evolution of these adaptive solutions benefit people as a whole. So in an example of our business, there are 14 million people in the US who struggle to dress themselves because of a disability. However, there are closer to 30 million people who could benefit from adaptive clothing. Not just that they struggle with it, but it would be more comfortable for them and provide more independence. So I just wanted to like pull that out and highlight that. Thanks, Raj.
I mean, I think it's an important point to make is that, these solutions in the future, just from a technological standpoint, are sometimes the things that gain mass adoption. I mean, most people are looking for simpler solutions when it comes to their day-to-day lives. And sometimes these solutions start in different areas that we don't necessarily think of, right? So I guess another question I would kind of want to hear your guys' perspective is where do you see the space growing to from just a future development, maybe more of a long-term perspective of how you see this thing evolving? Especially I'm curious, Steve, in your perspective when it comes to what you're working on as well.
I think to sort of, I think it dovetails with what Erica was just talking about is that, I think the future development is really going to be, in terms of a lot of these things we've been discussing, bringing people into the workforce that have accessibility needs. That's going to be a big push. Investors that are realizing that this is a space that needs to be focused on. These solutions can have broader impacts. On our side of things, we utilize some AI and machine learning to provide a grade for the speech sound exercise, right? So while that's a great use case in speech therapy, if you sort of let your mind run wild a little bit, you can think about the broader applications of better speech recognition. not everyone is a quote unquote traditional English speaker. Everyone has their own nuance to their speech. And that is a lot of people that can really benefit, whether they're trying to modify their accent to be more English, whether they're trying to modify their accent to be more Italian because they're learning Italian and they want to integrate better into that society, or, they're a kid and they want to interact with Amazon Alexa and Amazon Alexa can't identify what they're saying. I mean, it really goes beyond maybe that initial use case that you're looking at. And that's exactly what Raj and Erica were talking about, is we develop these solutions with a specific use case in mind. And then we sort of realized, well, hold on, wait a minute. Everyone can kind of benefit from these things to just make their life easier. And I think that's what a lot of people are going to start to catch on to, is that, well, these start from maybe a disability or accessibility place. We really need to pay focus to it, because these are the solutions that are going to go on and change not just those lives, but everyone's life. So I think this is kind of the way of the future, but maybe I'm a little biased. I don't know.
Any thoughts on that, Raj?
Yeah, I think Erica's example for of the text messaging was like nail on the head, just spot on. And Steve, your examples of applying this beyond just the therapeutic needs, right? Just normal day-to-day existence, is also rock solid. Now, in terms of what we are trying to do, if you just talk to a few, and you don't have to talk to too many, just a few agencies that provide wheelchairs around the world, you'll realize that wheelchairs today are crazy expensive. Crazy expensive. You're talking in the order of multiple, sometimes $2-digit $1,000. Now, of course, in the US, Medicare and Medicaid come in and subsidize it like crazy. So the manufacturers are not as incentivized to reduce their costs or reduce their, I take that back. They're not incentivized to reduce their price as much because there's this gigantic subsidy coming from the government. Many of the manufacturers in the US have offshored manufacturing to make the costs lower so that they can keep the prices relatively high. Now, this is just normal corporate America doing its job, right? But I traveled to India and talked to a few agencies over there that provide disability services. And they said, we can barely afford a manual wheelchair. Why are you here talking to us about an electric wheelchair? Manual wheelchairs cost us about 200 US. So we end up striking deals with these manufacturers in China who sell it to us for 50 US dollars. That itself is 3 times what we can afford. So we apply to grants to US and Europe-based agencies that allow us to bring this hardware in India. We pay crazy duties for it, and then we give it to this kid who can use it in his village or in his town. And then we realize, gosh, the streets are not ADA compliant. So where do these people go? So I think the broader picture I'm trying to paint is not only are the infrastructure challenges today that we have to overcome, there are also these cost barriers we have to overcome. And the solutions we are bringing as Blueberry technology hopefully addresses the cost side. And we can, in some sense, reduce the cost of these wheelchairs, not just autonomous wheelchairs, but all electric wheelchairs, to something more approachable. Will it solve the problem? I hope so, but I can assure you not anytime soon, but over time. So the larger population of folks who could use a wheelchair to change their quality of life, I think is really large. And at least from a mission standpoint, that's what we're trying to bring about, is to get accessible mobility for everyone. Can we change the infrastructure? Most likely not. But if we don't do anything, there's no reason for the infrastructure to change. So there's got to be a pull and push somewhere. So we are hopefully impacting the pull side, and we will see governments and cities begin to improve the infrastructure to make places more ADA accessible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's an important point to mention, and you might have mentioned this, Raj, is that, even if you're able-bodied right now, most of us are going to go through our own challenges in our life, whether that's cognitively or physically. So, being aware of these solutions is critically important.
Well, absolutely. If I might, Rob,
Yeah.
I was talking to this lady who has cerebral palsy, and I might have mentioned this example earlier to someone. Her name is Elizabeth. She's an amazing person. She's in the Bay Area and she's a self-advocate for disability rights. And she was on this panel, and she said, "Hey, all you able-bodied people, keep in mind that with life expectancy going up, it's only a matter of time before you have some kind of disability. It may not be the cerebral palsy that I have, but you will have some kind of motor deficiency or cognitive disability. And the fact that I have cerebral palsy doesn't make me cognitively incapable. I'm just as smart as you are. It just takes me a lot of time to get the words out, a lot of time to move the wheelchair." So she said, exercise just some empathy, exercise some acceptance of my challenges. And you'll realize that when you are in my spot, because it's just a matter of time before you need a wheelchair, that the rest of the world is as accepting of you. So have some empathy. That was her appeal, and it really resonated with me.
Yeah, it's critically impactful. And Erica, I know you kind of touched on that too, that what you're developing is for people that maybe need a simpler solution to their clothing as well. Is that something that people didn't necessarily realize that this is something they needed, and when you sort of demonstrate your idea to them, they're like, "Oh, I want to use this."
Yeah, absolutely. I think the case of our the sensory friendly clothing that we have in development right now is a great example of, we developed it specifically for people who have sensory processing disorders. So they often like softer materials. The designs are tagless, seamless. Sometimes people find comfort in sort of a compression type shirt. But, as we were testing this, I had a friend with eczema, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome. Like, these soft materials don't irritate my skin the same way that some other materials do." So noting that there are broader applications there too. And our wheelchair pants, another example, we were like, these are pants for people in wheelchairs. They're made to be in a seated position. But we noticed that segments of the aging population love them also because they're frequently in a seated position, have limited mobility. So even though they're not in a wheelchair, they still find it more comfortable. So yes, and that's something I wanted to touch on too as we're discussing kind of the future of this technology and everything. I'm hopeful that we see a shift in, instead of having separate products for, this is the everyday user product, and this is the adaptive version of that. I'm hoping that in the future we're going to see this shift to designers thinking about, this is the product we want to make, this is the function, how can we make it also work for people with disabilities? Instead of having two separate products, it's one product that works for everybody, because unit economics, that makes more sense. And then also so from a business side, it makes sense. And then from an inclusivity side, it makes sense also. And I'm hoping that the technology sees a similar shift in that, I think it's brilliant that Steve's like thinking about AI and how can that help accessibility. And I'm hoping that, as technology develops, that accessibility lens is kind of on the forefront of the mind in, okay, we've developed this thing, how can we use it? That's like the immediate afterthought, or one of the immediate thoughts in how can we apply this technology. So just a couple of points that I wanted to bring up based on earlier discussion.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are amazing points, I think. I know that all three of you are, obviously entrepreneurs and founders of your own company. What have been some of the challenges for you just entering into this space that you had to overcome that you didn't realize? Any thoughts there?
The list, Rob, of entrepreneurial challenges that I had to overcome are not that different from what every other entrepreneur goes through. So for me, I think I would rather focus some of my energies around the topic du jour, where I, being a able-bodied person, not needing a wheelchair in an airport, why am I working on this problem? I think that was one of those questions that many of the partners I'm working with, many of the airports I'm working with, many of the investors I'm working with, they constantly bring up, like, why? What drove you to work on this? Is there somebody in your family who had this challenge? So it's almost a case of trying to convince them that, hey, there are quite a few of us out there who want to do it because it means something to us. We're not doing this from the standpoint of, oh gosh, I got to be the next billionaire. That is hands down not the goal here, right? The goal here is to take technologies that have become commonplace in the consumer space, but have not propagated down or propagated up, whichever way you want to look at it, to a smaller segment of the disability space. That's really the change that we want to bring about. So a lot of the conversation that I spend as an entrepreneur is to try to convince people I want to hire, people who are investing in us, people who I'm partnering with. Hey, I'm doing this out of a place of genuine desire to do something different, not from a place of a capitalistic mindset of becoming the next mega rich person. So that's been one key challenge. The other key challenge is my well-bodiedness, or whatever you want to call it. The fact that I'm able-bodied is a huge impediment in me empathizing with folks who are not able-bodied, because I come with preconceived notions that I have to constantly dispel. I assume that getting in on a wheelchair like such should be possible. It was quite easy for me. Well, not so easy for somebody with a certain kind of disability. So that empathy is a muscle I just have to grow. And it has nothing to do with entrepreneurship, but it has to do with just me empathizing with our user, with me trying to build the right product for the user. So that is a challenge for sure that I have to learn and have to overcome. The third class of challenges I have faced is in trying to break into the manufacturing segment over here. So most of the manufacturers that make wheelchairs today, they know what the total addressable market is. They know how much money can be made. They know what kind of products to make, what the certification challenges are, what the compliance needs are. And here we are coming in with a slightly different take on it. And we are, in some sense, challenging some of those well-established notions. So finding a manufacturer who is willing to partner with us and build a low-cost device with comparable, if not better, functionality, that has been a significant hurdle to overcome. Because it very quickly becomes a case of, okay, these many wheelchairs, these many dollars per wheelchair, too small a business, not getting in. That's the math that manufacturers get into without realizing the entire business model that we are after, where they could make a good bit of money if they chose to go beyond just the standard electric wheelchair and look at a low-cost wheelchair that opens up a much larger market.
How have you kind of overcome that solution then, with especially manufacturing?
Oh goodness, most of it is time, and spending a lot of time. And with COVID, it's been good and bad, because it just gave us a bunch of time to do good product development, but it also made the world virtual, which means I didn't have to travel around the world to go find these manufacturers and have face-to-face conversations. We were, a Google Meet or a Zoom or a phone call away. So a lot of time was spent in talking with them and trying to convince them. Now, I can tell you, we've talked to 16 different manufacturers so far. We've had luck with one. So that should give you an idea of the hit rate over here. And these 16 are, the 15 of the 16 that we talked to are big name companies, big name manufacturers with well-established manufacturing capabilities. We just got no traction from them. So we had to find somebody literally out of the box and start working with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's some of that entrepreneurial creativeness, for sure. Steve, any challenges that may have just been brought up as well when trying to enter into this space?
Yeah, one of the things that I would piggyback on from what Raj said is, the learning. I'm not a speech therapist. I didn't go through speech therapy myself, so we as a company we do have a personal connection. My co-founder's little brother went through speech therapy, and that's why we started this, and we have a speech therapist on the team. But I just sort of believed in the mission and thought it was a great business and got excited about the idea and continually am. But that's been something that I've had to learn is just, most speech therapists, they have a master's degree. Some of them have PhDs. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge base there that I've had to, just as the CEO of the company, tried to learn and pick up, just so I can speak intelligently about the space and can bring speech therapists on to work with us and convince them of the mission and all the rest. So that's been a challenge for me just personally. One of the challenges for our business has been just anytime you're trying to do something new is just that educational piece to convince not only insurance players but parents and other speech therapists to buy into what you're doing, and to see that this is a progression and this is something that's going to improve the space. For example, right now there's sort of a little bit of a battle, and I think it's been a positive of COVID, if I could say that, that insurance companies for a long time have not been convinced of the power of teletherapy, and for a lot of insurance companies, they don't reimburse teletherapy, or if they do, it's at a reduced rate. But right now, what you're seeing is, because of COVID, it's just had to be adopted. People just have had to use it, and now insurance companies are starting to see that they can't avoid it anymore. And I think the governor of Arizona just signed a bill making it mandatory for insurance companies to reimburse teletherapy. So you're starting to see it pick up, and you're starting to see the winds change. But that's been a little bit of a battle for our business.
And when it comes to able-bodied people, has there been any teletherapy applications that you've seen facing the industry that maybe somebody that doesn't have this problem right now are kind of facing either in the future or they sort of develop them?
Yeah, I think you're seeing a lot of. The one that comes to mind is that's, I think, having a lot of success right now is in the mental health space. You're seeing a lot of companies that are either providing teletherapy or asynchronous care. And I think a lot of people are gravitating towards that. And just being able to really easily get some help with something that, even if they don't need continued mental health services, maybe they're just going through a rough time. Maybe they just need to talk to someone about something that happened in their day. And they don't want to go find a therapist, sit down for an hour, or maybe they feel that there's a stigma attached. Whatever their concerns might be, sort of breaking down that barrier to entry for the patient, that's been, I think, really on the rise, and really something that's fantastic, because more and more people are accessing it, which is also helping the stigmatism that people are realizing that, it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to go get help. It's Erica, I think it's interesting that investor said that they don't know anyone with disability. I think you're right. If they reevaluated and they really did a deep dive, there are people around you that are struggling with things you might not know, see, hear, or perceive, that is fine. And there are solutions out there, and go get help. Go access it. The technology we have today is just making it so easy, and I think it's a great thing. So that's one of the things. I don't know about able-bodied, but
yeah,
if you think about more people than just kids with a speech need, that would probably be the thing. And then, telehealth doctors, I mean, that's hey, I have this rash. I'm not sure what it is. Take a picture, send it to your doctor, and then they get immediate feedback. So that's probably something that I also see, but yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Erica, what have been some unforeseen circumstances or challenges that you kind of went through?
Yeah, so I guess I actually got into this because I lost my leg and started altering my own clothing. And so I have a little bit of an opposite problem where I'm like really tied to this problem in this community, but I do not have a business background. And so I had to kind of learn that along the way, and I'm still learning for that and hiring for that to kind of cover where I lack a skill set. But I think, one of the biggest challenges that we've faced and had to overcome is, I touched upon it earlier, kind of that segmentation that everybody's adaptive journey looks a little bit different, and everybody's needs are a little bit different. So we decided that we were going to very intentionally break down this adaptive umbrella into very tiny segments, in the hopes that we can have something that works for everybody. And so that presents a challenge from the manufacturing side, and like, how do you make your unit economics make sense when you're breaking this down into so many different styles and types of clothing. And so that's something that we're working on. And one of the, answers we've come to is just very creative sourcing and designing so that, our manufacturing from one garment to the next doesn't look all that different, that machines have to be swapped out. And that's where a lot of the costs come from, I'm getting in the weeds, from an apparel standpoint. But really, we're passionate about like this, we are the place for inclusivity, and we don't want anyone to be left out of that. So, having that mission and being willing to make a business case for that also, because a lot of people are like, just make one thing that works for most people. And so we had to really stick to our guns and be like, no, that's not the mission. Like, the mission is to make something that works for everybody. I don't know, having that North Star of what we're trying to do has been helpful. And it's also been, a challenge. Not everybody agrees with that kind of mindset. So I think that's been kind of the biggest challenge that we've faced as it relates to this space. I mean, obviously we've faced a lot of other like pretty generic entrepreneurial challenges. I don't think my story is that different from like the person over here doing B2B SaaS or something like that. But in the adaptive space, that's been kind of the unique challenge.
Mm-hmm. And how have you made it more tangible? I know you spoke with an investor that's like, I didn't know anybody disabled. I mean, this could be a question for everybody that is just coming to mind. How have you made it more tangible for them to understand? I know we've talked about it a little bit here, but how have you overcome that?
Yeah, the answers that I have come up with are, one, just videos, lots of video content. Like I started in my investor outreach sending out more of a video pitch, and my response rate has increased like 300%. So having trouble with cold outreach, I suggest a video. Because it just illustrates the problem right away. Because people were like, comment was like, well, okay, adaptive clothing, that's great, but like, what is really the problem? So we show in a video, like someone trying to put on a pair of pants with a prosthetic, and it illustrates very clearly what the problem is. And so then that hurdle is overcome. And then being very specific and intentional and I put kind of my market sizing pretty darn close to the front, where I don't think other businesses would put it there, but just because it's a common question and kind of the first thing, if someone's shutting down right away when they hear accessibility or disability because it's a niche market, I'm hoping that they're open-minded at least until I can get through that slide and be like, these are the numbers, and appeal to those people right off the bat so they don't shut down quite as quickly. And like, yes, being very intentional and walking through the numbers first for those kinds of people. And I feel like I can have a couple pitches, and one, the numbers are at the beginning, and one, they're like more at the normal spot where you would put them. I can like feel out in the first few sentences of a conversation whether I need to put those numbers at the beginning or where they normally go. So those are just kind of some of the tricks that I've used to overcome some of the preconceived notions about what a startup that caters to people with disabilities is.
Raj or Steve, do you have any thoughts there with how to make your products seem more tangible from that perspective as well?
Yeah, so most friction I've received from an investor has not been so much to not understand the problem, because people do understand that, yes, I need to move a person from point A to point B in an airport. This happens relatively frequently. It's one-on-one, meaning one person pushing another person, so it's not scalable. So they get that aspect. But not unlike what Erica is mentioning, our market sizing is quite far up front. Because the first thing they ask is, how big is this market? If you tell them, hey, it's about 1 to almost 2% of the number of passengers in any airport on any given day. And they're like, really? That can't be. That's too big. I'm like, no, these are hard numbers from San Francisco Airport. These are hard numbers from the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. These are hard numbers from Atlanta Airport. And they very quickly realize, oh gosh, this is a lot of rides. And you want to capture all of them? I said, no, we don't even have a dream that we will convert every single ride to a electric autonomous wheelchair. Because there's always going to be some passengers who will want that human touch, who will want that human interaction. So I think being upfront and not saying that, okay, every wheelchair in airports in 2025 is going to be one of ours. That's obviously a lie. There's going to be a gradual transition. There's going to be a gradual acceptance rate. And we'd be happy if we reached a 50% saturation. We'd be really happy. So being upfront about how we calculate market size, I think, helps a few people get over that hurdle. A few of the other challenges we have in getting people over the hump, and I'll be honest, there will be some investors that just have to say, thank you, but no thank you. Because they're after this booming SaaS business. They're after this 6,000% return. Like, okay, we're not it. So maybe you should knock on some of the door, and we'll knock on some of the doors. So I think being upfront about how we calculate our revenues, how we expect to calculate our revenues, what our costs are, being very transparent as much as you can be. And this, honestly, being my first entrepreneurial gig, I'm a novice at this too. It's not like I've done this earlier. So I just want to be as upfront and honest about what I am pitching so that the investor on the other side of the screen also sees that same transparency and is able to at least try to understand what we are after. And so far, we've gotten investors who are willing to stick with us for the long run because they're not in a hurry to get a return on their investment. So I think being very upfront helps because you get the right kind of investor. Well, you don't want the wrong kind of investor who very quickly is in your business saying, you said May 2021, it is June 1st. Why haven't you completed that deadline? You don't want that kind of pressure because it's debilitating very quickly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think for us, Raj, we're similar in that for our company, it hasn't been so much trying to convince people that speech therapy is a need. I mean, a lot of people have either gone through it themselves, or it's about 5% of kids have some sort of a speech need at some point in their life. So it is and that's just for kids. There's elderly patients, stroke patients, traumatic brain injury. So convincing people that speech therapy is a needed service hasn't been quite the hurdle we've had to jump. The hurdle has come more on, okay, well, why this solution? Why are the current delivery models not sufficient? So to describe to them, why it's a problem for someone in a rural part of the world needing to drive 2 hours to get care, or why kids don't do their speech therapy practice at home, and why it's been proven, just like any other, motor learning, the more you do it, the better you get at it. So the more you practice, the quicker you're gonna make progress. So sort of walking them through that. And then Raj, like you touched on, being upfront about what you're going to accomplish. Our goal is to we use automation to automate the speech therapy home practice, but being upfront that that's a solution that might work for a lot of people, but not everyone. And some kids are going to need face-to-face care. And that's why we built in that teletherapy layer as well, so that kids where the automated program just isn't working, they can access a teletherapist, they can get that face-to-face instruction. And that's resonated with people. So yeah, just being upfront and getting the right investors, the right people that buy into the mission, that understand what you're doing, and that are going to act as a partner and not as a barrier. That's key, and I think that's key for every business, not just ones in the disability space, but especially for ours, trying to do something that's maybe a little different and maybe not what they've seen before, from a B2B SaaS play or a social media app or something like that. It's very key. So
I know we only have a few more minutes here, so I kind of wanted to ask, I don't know if it's too much of a philosophical question, but you guys are all in your niche areas. I would love to hear what your overall vision would be for what you're trying to accomplish. What problem would you want to see solved in this space? It could be in your industry, it could be in the overall disability industry. I would love to hear your vision long term.
I think regardless of what Erica or Steve or I or thousands of other entrepreneurs who are working in the disability space are doing, I think we will all generally agree. And to be clear, we haven't synced about this earlier, so I'm not. So I'm making this up as I'm going. I think what we will all expect of the world is to have some empathy. Really, that's simple. It doesn't matter empathy for who, right? Because the moment you have empathy for a person in a certain situation, you get acceptance, you get inclusion, and very quickly you start making accommodations for the person next to you. And this will, I think, broadly apply to not just the disability space, but just about anything. I think all we would want to look for, or at least I would want to look for, is for each of us to have empathy for the person who's next to us, the person, whether we're trying to help them or not. Just empathize with their situation, and not think that there's a solution out there that should have solved it. So let's move on. Let's have some empathy, and if we can, let's try to solve that problem with them.
What I really hope to see is just accessibility baked in from the ground up in every venture. Like, I challenge people watching this too to think about how accessibility is incorporated into the product or service that you're building, and not as kind of an afterthought. So I think of it as like a building, instead of building the building and then being like, okay, where can we add ramps? Like, from the plan, from the initial idea, think about, because no one's going to be inconvenienced by accessibility. Like, you are only going to improve whatever it is you are working on by incorporating accessibility early, then thinking of it afterward. Okay, we've created this product, now how do we make it accessible? So that's kind of the shift that I'm hoping to see across all fields, products, services, places, is, really thinking from a design standpoint, how does this work for everybody from day one inception of whatever it is?
I would echo what Erica and Raj said. The empathy standpoint, the patient standpoint. In our space, if someone has a speech need that they're working on, it doesn't mean that their cognitive ability is not there. It's just the way that they're communicating is just slightly different than how you communicate. So just recognize that and be accepting and have empathy and have patience, because they're going to bring a different perspective than you have, and that's good. And Erica, I completely agree. Building it in from the start is where I'd like to see that, and I'd like to see this shift change where people view that as not only the right thing to do from just as a human being, but also as good business. I mean, it broadens your addressable market. So why not? I mean, the more customer, I know we're in this in some regards to make some money, and that's good business, is to address as many people as you can, and not only it being the right thing to do as a human being. So that's what I'd like to see moving forward, is more companies and more institutions viewing it that way, because it's just it's great. It's great to build it in from the start. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I thought it was a really great panel, and you guys gave an amazing insight. I wish you all the best success when it comes to your startups, and hopefully the entrepreneurial challenges aren't too much difficult, but I'm sure that there'll be a lot still. But thank you overall, and I really appreciate you guys doing this.
Absolutely, Rob. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.